I'm going to talk about 5 specific secrets that are overlooked by many non-dual teachers. Some of these teachers don't even only overlook them, they would actively deny them. And I'm not doing this to criticize the teachers. I'm just doing it because if you understand what's often being overlooked, you can take your study of non-duality, your practice of non-duality to a different level. And you can avoid some of the pitfalls that you see many of the people who study non-duality go into. So the very first secret I'm going to talk about is, we could say it this way: what is your goal of studying spiritual teachings or non-dual teachings? What do you hope to get out of it? And in many cases, non-dual teachers will say, well, either it's to get out of suffering, but how do you get out of suffering? By getting into this non-dual state of awareness. You're obviously not in this state of awareness right now, so how do you get to it? And this has caused these non-dual teachers to focus on a goal, but they forget to talk about the mechanics of how to get there. It's kind of like, let's say you are surfing the internet and you come across this advertising for a travel agency. And they have this wonderful picture of this white sandy beach and a blue ocean and green palm trees. And they're talking about how wonderful it is for you to travel away from the dreariness of winter and get to this sunny place, wherever it is. And you are sitting there, and in your mind's eye, you can just see yourself at that beach. But what they're not talking about in the advertising is, well, you have to get off from work, you have to get somebody to look after your cat, you have to pack, you have to travel for a while to get to the airport, you have to stand in line and get through security, you have to get into this cramped plane and sit in this cramped seat for several hours, and then you have to get out and go through customs and take a hot bus to the hotel, and then finally you can unpack and go to the beach, where there's, by the way, 1,000 other people sitting there, which they didn't show in the ad. So what I'm saying is, the secret that most non-dual teachers don't really talk about is how to get to the non-dual state of consciousness. Because they make it seem like it's just a matter of switching the mind. Now, there are some non-dual teachers who will say it isn't actually a matter of getting into a non-dual state, because you're already there. You can't get away from it. You just have to overcome the illusion that you are not there. And that's a valid enough viewpoint, but still, how do you then overcome the illusion? You see what I'm getting at here? The first secret that I want to talk about is that non-duality, or a non-dual state of consciousness, isn't something you get into. But in order to attain it, you have to ask yourself a simple question: why am I not in it? Or rather, how did I get out of it? Because there are quite a few non-dual teachers that realize that the non-dual state of awareness is actually our natural state. But they still don't ask, well, if the non-dual state is natural, how did we get out of it? Why aren't we in it right now? And if you don't ask yourself that question, it's like you are sitting there looking at the advertising for the wonderful sunny beach. And in your mind's eye, you can go in and you can feel like you're there. You can really feel like you're there. And you can almost hear the waves gently lapping on the sand, and maybe there's birds in the background, and you can feel like you're there. But when you open your eyes, you're still sitting there in front of your computer. If you don't go through all these steps of packing and getting to the airport and sitting in the plane, how are you ever going to get to the beach? How are you going to get from the pretend state that you're on the beach to actually being on the beach? So how are you going to get from the pretend state that you are in a non-dual awareness because you're sitting and listening to this teacher who describes this wonderful state to the point where you're actually there? Well, you have to look at what steps is it going to take to get there. And in order to do that, you have to look at what steps did you take to get out of there? How did we get out of the non-dual state of consciousness, and why? Because if we don't understand how we got out of the non-dual state, the natural state, how are we going to get back into it? Okay, so this is the second statement, or the second secret I'm going to talk about. Because when you listen to some of these non-dual teachers that are only focusing on the wonderful state of non-dual awareness or awakening or enlightenment, to me they sound like fundamentalist Christians. Because what do fundamentalist Christians do? They are saying there is this wonderful state called salvation, and in order to attain it, all you have to do is declare Jesus to be your Lord and Savior. In other words, you don't have to do anything else. You especially don't have to look at your own psychology, what Jesus actually called the beam in your own eye. You don't have to look at your psychology. You don't have to look at why you are in a dual state, a dualistic state of consciousness. No. Just listen to these teachers and wait for their awakening experience. So you suddenly see, and then you are awakened, you are enlightened, you are in a non-dual state of awareness. Because that's what some of these teachers claimed happened to them. So what I'm saying is that this is, well, you can take two approaches to it. You can say, okay, I'm going to follow these teachers, I'm going to study these teachings, and there are some people who have already done that for years, and they haven't attained awakening or enlightenment. So you can say, well, it must be right around the corner. But again, if you're sitting there looking at the picture of the tropical beach, but you're not willing to take the practical steps to actually get there, are you getting closer? Or are you just basically where you started? You may have a greater understanding because you've been listening to these teachings, but have you gotten any closer? So the secret, the number two secret is this. You cannot attain a non-dual state of consciousness without understanding how you got away from the non-dual state of consciousness. And how did you get away from the non-dual state of consciousness? By going into the dualistic state of consciousness. And therefore, as I've said in many of my videos about non-duality, if you do not understand duality, you cannot attain non-duality. And I will explain to you why that is. So, there are some of these non-dual teachers that seems to me they are completely denying reincarnation. And this leaves a very big explanation problem. And that's why, they don't talk about what you have, they don't talk about how you got into the duality consciousness, because they can't explain it if they deny reincarnation. Other than say, oh, you were born into it, it just happens, it's just some cosmic accident. Or everybody is a sinner, everybody is in dualistic state of consciousness. But what I'm saying is, when you accept reincarnation, you realize there was a point in the distant past where your being, your life stream, came into existence. And when you came into existence, you had a point-like sense of self, but you had a sense that you were connected, an intuitive sense that you were connected to something outside your own mind. Your mind was not a complete system. And so, as I explained, we are meant to go through a process of expanding our sense of self. That's why we were created. And we have two options for how we choose, how we use our free will. Because we do have will, the ability to choose. Again, some non-dual teachers will deny that we have free will. But that's again because they've gotten themselves into this, they painted themselves into a corner by denying reincarnation, by not talking about how we got into duality. There's a lot of things they can't explain. So that's why they have to explain them away. And they explain away free will as not being important. But our entire existence revolves around our free will, however free it is at the time. But we are making choices. So we have two basic choices. We start out as connected beings, and we can build on that sense of connection. Expand our sense of connection, which is essentially the connection with our higher self. But the other option we have is we can go into what I call the consciousness of separation, the illusion that we are separate beings. And this is an experience we are allowed to have. We are allowed to have that as part of the outplaying of free will. Not everybody chooses to go into separation, but everybody has to have at least some understanding of what the separate state of consciousness is. And so how do you go into separation? How do you lose the sense that you are a connected being and instead suddenly shift and see yourself as a separate being? Well, you do that through what I call the duality consciousness. And I've talked about it at length in several of my non-duality videos. So I'm not going to go too much into it here, other than say, in the duality consciousness, you are creating an illusion. You're simply creating an illusion. But it's not just one illusion. It's many different illusions that you take on. So one way I explain this or illustrate this is to say, going into duality is like going into a maze. Because once you are in a maze, a labyrinth, all you can see are these hedges or walls or whatever it's made out of. And you can't see the entrance point, you can't see the exit. As soon as you've gotten a little bit into the maze, you can't see the exit. So that's why you think that you have to react to the situation, to what you are seeing. So you're seeing that the past divides into two. I have to choose one over the other. And in order to choose one, you are creating this illusion that this is what you have to do. There's a reason why you're doing this. So then you take this turn. Now you come to another point where the past divides. You make another choice by creating another illusion. And what you're actually creating is what I call the subconscious selves that you have in your subconscious mind, like a reactionary pattern. I use many different examples. One of them is there's a certain person that always makes you angry. And because that person is pushing a button in your subconscious mind, that's a reactionary pattern, always makes you react a certain way. Okay, so what I'm saying is that over many lifetimes, each of us has created our own personal maze, where we have taken a lot of twists and turns in our subconscious minds to go further and further into this illusion that we're separate beings. Now again, there isn't anything wrong with it as such, because you can look at the two states. We're a connected being, we're a separate being. When you are a connected being, you will naturally follow the golden rule. Don't do unto others what you don't want them to do to you. And the reason for this is that when you're connected, you realize that we all came from the same source. So if I'm harming you, I'm actually harming myself. But when you go into separation, you can have the illusion, you can believe in the illusion, oh, I can harm you and it doesn't affect me. And this is the experiences, the kind of experiences you can have in the duality consciousness. Not only that, you can believe that you can't get away with it, but you can also believe that you're doing something good, that it has some epic purpose, as I explain in my videos about ego dramas, where you have these epic dramas that you can believe in. Now, so what I'm saying is, you have over many past lifetimes created your own personal maze. You have gone into this maze, you have taken all of these twists and turns. So right now, you're at a certain point of the maze. You're over here. The exit is over here. But between you and the exit are many of these twists and turns where you made these decisions to create these separate selves. And the only way to get out of duality, to get into a non-dual state of awareness, is to retrace your own steps, your personal steps in the maze, to get back to the exit. Because you can only get out where you entered. There's no other way out. Okay? There's no shortcut. You can't just phone a friend that will send a helicopter and takes you out of the maze. There is no shortcut there. You have to retrace your steps back to the exit. And how do you retrace your steps? By coming to see every illusion that you chose to accept in order to have a particular experience or in order to respond to trauma. It's not just that you have experiences in the maze, you also respond to the conditions on a planet like Earth where there is so much conflict and suffering. So you have to retrace these steps. And there is no other way. I know from a marketing standpoint, this is a completely wrong thing to say. But I'm not interested in people who want a shortcut. Because I've been on the spiritual path for 48 years. And I can guarantee you that if there had been a shortcut, I would have found it in those 48 years. And on the contrary, what I have found is if you want real results, there's only one way to do it. And that is to resolve your psychology, the unresolved psychology, the illusions you have. It is the only way. Everything else is just smoke and mirrors. If somebody tells you there's a shortcut, they're lying to you. I mean, they're simply lying to you. And they're lying to you because they want to get something out of it. Either they want to get your energy, or they want to get your money, or your obedience, they want to get power, but they're lying to you. Okay? They're selling you an impossible dream. Because the reality is that there's only one way out of duality, only one way out of suffering, that is to retrace your steps, to follow a path, systematic path. You're retracing your steps in the maze, and you are consciously undoing these decisions. And why is this? Because, as I said, we have free will, so we have the right to choose to go into duality. But the entire purpose of life is our learning process, our expansion of self, expanding our sense of self, becoming more aware of how the world works, how our own minds work. So, you're allowed to go into the duality consciousness. You're allowed to take on all these illusions. You're allowed to make yourself experience that you're a separate self. But the purpose for that is you can learn something from it, right? But you see, when you take on an illusion, you're not really aware that it's an illusion. You actually believe this is the way it is, and this is something you have to do. So you're not really learning from taking on an illusion. Let's just make this practical. One of the experiences you can't have as a connected being is that you are a martial arts warrior who is so good at karate or kung fu or whatever, you can beat other people. You're better than other people. It's one of the basic experiences in the duality consciousness. You're better than others. Well, you can't do that if you're a connected being because you don't want to beat somebody up. But so you can only do it by going to the separate state of mind. And now you take on certain illusions and make it seem like this is desirable. You can even see some martial arts practitioners that have made it into a spiritual practice. It isn't really so much about defeating the opponent, but it's about controlling the mind and this and that. So what I'm trying to say is nothing wrong with you saying, I want to have this experience. But you don't really learn by taking on the illusions that make you think you are a warrior and that it's epically important for you to defeat the opponent. You only learn when you come to consciously see the limitations of the illusion and, so to speak, take off the illusion again. That's how you learn. So if you were allowed to go into this maze and take on all these illusions, And if there was a shortcut that instantly brought you out of the maze, what would you have learned? So what would then be the purpose of the whole thing? So, and this of course could be said to be another secret, but I'll maybe just talk about something else first. So, the third secret that many non-dual teachers either don't grasp or deliberately ignore is that they are claiming that non-dual means non-differentiated. Goes back to this old Indian saying, only Brahman is real, the world is an illusion. And they will say that Brahman is not the personal God we were brought up with in the West. Brahman is a state of consciousness where there's no differentiation, because there's no division. There can't be division in Brahman. And therefore the world where you have differentiation between different forms, that's an illusion, that's what they say. And as I've said in several videos, this is, it's really a fatal misunderstanding, because differentiation into different forms is not the same as the duality consciousness. I'll also explain this in depth, but basically, make it very short. You can have a square and you can have a triangle. They are just different forms. But what the duality consciousness will go in and say, well, the square is perfect and the triangle is imperfect. Or as the Catholics said in the Middle Ages, a circle is the perfect form, an oval is imperfect, therefore the planets must move around the Earth in circular orbits. This is duality. You're imposing a value judgment on forms. You're saying some forms are good or some forms are bad. Or you are saying all forms are bad and only the undifferentiated is good. But this is duality. In reality, where did the world come from? Oh, it must have come out of, whether you call it Brahman or infinite awareness or the creator. Whatever the source must have created a world of forms. And the source must have decided to create self-aware beings. But if the source is undivided consciousness, where do we all come from? Well, we came out of the Creator's being. We are self-aware extensions of the Creator. And what's the purpose of this? As I explained in several videos, including my video about how the world was created. Watch that video if you really want to understand the deeper importance of what I'm talking about here. What's the purpose? When you say that everything is undifferentiated, there can't be any purpose. But in reality, the purpose is that we start with a point-like sense of self, we gradually expand our sense of self, and we do this by interacting with the environment we are in, so that we understand all aspects of how the Creator created the world, why these principles are the way they are, in order to make a world that's sustainable. And then we gradually raise our awareness until we reach the Creator consciousness. And so this could be said to be the purpose, and this is what's it's missing from many non-dual teachings. And it's missing because they have, as the foundation for their teaching, they have said this: only Brahman is real, the world is an illusion. Therefore, only the undifferentiated is real. Any differentiation is an illusion. And that leads us to the next secret, which is that they say, well, first of all, they say there is no real purpose to life. Implicitly they're saying the purpose of existence is to exist, go through all this suffering, and then awaken from suffering, and when you awaken, you disappear. as a differentiated being. So this is the next secret number 4, which is that awakening or becoming enlightened means that you cease to exist as an individual being. You give up the self. You lose the sense of self. And, you know, I personally don't understand how anybody can believe this. I simply don't. Honestly, I look at this and I'm saying, how can anyone believe this? But I see that there are people out there who believe it. They bought into it. They will even, they have created these YouTube channels and they will give you these long videos on how they attained the state of no self. And what you will see from these people is that they seem depressed. I mean, they have no vitality, no output from their auras. It's like there's just no light bulb there. The light bulb was switched off. And if you want to attain that state, by all means go for it. You definitely don't need me. Because my view of life is that, or my experience with life is that when you start realizing that all suffering is caused by the dualistic state of consciousness, when you start realizing how the dualistic consciousness works and you start overcoming these dualistic illusions, you don't attain a state of non-purpose. You recapture your original purpose, which is that you are a self-aware being. You are experiencing the world from your individual vantage point. And it's a miracle. It's a gift. We have been given the gift of an extension, a spark of our Creator's being. And we have the potential to expand it until we reach the same state of consciousness or level of consciousness as the Creator. I mean, it's just a miracle. And the more that I have grown on the path over these 8 years, the more I've tuned into this miracle. I haven't lost a sense of purpose. I've captured a much higher sense of purpose. I haven't lost any joy in life. I have recaptured joy in life, expanded my joy of being alive. And but see, and this is the trick, you know, it's not that you can go and say that it's wrong what many of these non-dual teachers are talking about overcoming the self. It's just that you have to make a distinction that they are not making. Because again, as I said, they are trapped in this logical fallacy that any kind of differentiation is duality. No, differentiation is duality. Differentiation is differentiation. Duality is a state of consciousness that is separate from one. As I've said before, the Creator created the world of form, and it knows what it's created. It didn't make a mistake. It didn't forget. Okay? It knows what it's created. And it created us to help co-create, but also so the Creator can experience its own creation from the inside. And the Creator wants us to grow, wants us to reach the same level of consciousness as the Creator, which doesn't mean we disappear. We become creators in our own right. If we want to, we can create our own creation because now we have the experience based on seeing how our creation worked. So, it's this again, you have to make a distinction between the self that we were given by our Creator, which is let's call it the individual self, and then the separate self. Because it's very true, the separate self can only suffer because the separate self is created out of an illusion. And in order to survive, the separate self has to defend its illusion, but in duality, there's always an opposition. So the illusion of the separate self is always threatened. And that's why once you've taken the first step into the maze, you're taking on a certain dualistic illusion. You feel threatened by another. Therefore, you have to create another self to deal with that threat. So you take another step into the maze, and you just keep going. as long as you're trying to defend, until you turn around and say, is there a better way? I've had enough of this experience of suffering because I see that whatever I do creates more suffering. So we have to overcome the separate self. But see, the separate self is not one self. It's not one decision. It's not one illusion. It's not that you can just awaken. Oh yeah, now I'm awakened. Now I'm free. No, it's made up of a lot of illusions. And you have to undo each one because that's how you learn. You actually learn that our minds work a very specific way. Our minds work in such a way that I've compared the universe to a reality simulator, where we can create a certain illusion in our minds. We are creating a mental image in our minds. We are projecting it onto the simulator. And the simulator takes on the form. It's like saying you are in one of these virtual reality goggles. But most goggles, they have a predefined program that it's playing for you. And you can interact with it because you can move around with it. But let's now say that you have these virtual reality goggles where you, in your mind, perhaps even without being aware of it, you are projecting into the simulator what experience you want to get back from the simulator, and the simulator just reflects it. That's how the material universe works. And so our minds can create any sense of self. And once you're inside the self, it seems real. It seems like this is the way it is. You can create the illusion you're a separate self. You're a warrior, for example. And you are totally identified with it when you're inside. It's an immersive experience. And it's only by actually exploring how many illusions the mind can create until we've had enough of this, and we start wondering, is there something outside of these illusions, this separate state of mind? That's when we can come back to connectedness. But see, once we have gone into separation, and once we go back by unraveling each illusion, we have a much broader base of experience. So you could basically put it this way. When you are in the state of seeing yourself as a connected being, you are exploring, you are an explorer who is exploring, what am I? What kind of being am I? When you go into separation, you are basically also an explorer, but now you're exploring, what kind of being am I not? Because you're creating an illusion, you're living out the illusion until you're tired of it. And then you realize, oh, it was just an illusion I created. I'm not really a warrior. I'm not really this separate self. I'm not a powerless reactionary being that can only suffer. So you see again, it's if you take these non-dual teachings at face value, you're completely overlooking the entire purpose of your existence. Is it any wonder that these people feel depressed or seem depressed? So what about the people who are deliriously happy? Well, as I said, the mind can create any experience, any sense of self it wants. But this is all duality. You have non-dual teachers. But what they're talking about when they talk about non-duality is a mental image they created in the mind, from the mind of duality. They have a dualistic view of non-duality. I mean, even the saying, only Brahman is real, the world is an illusion, it's dualistic. You are setting up a dualistic polarity between something real and something illusory. As I said before, the complete quote by Shankara is, only Brahman is real, the world is an illusion, the world is Brahman. But then why say the world is an illusion? The illusion is that the world is separated from Brahman, is different from Brahman, is other than Brahman. But see, realizing that you are Brahman or infinite awareness does not mean that you lose your individual self, because that self was given to you by the Creator for a purpose. Not just to suffer and then awaken and disappear. but so you can grow. And so this leads me to the fifth secret I wanted to talk about, is that there are some non-dual teachers who are talking about enlightenment or awakening. And they are portraying it as this is, number one, an ultimate state of consciousness, and it's a permanent state of consciousness. Once you are awakened, you are awakened. And you have no more ego, you have no more sense of self, and you don't suffer. Well, I've talked about I have another video I talked about non-dual teachers lying about awakening because they are portraying that, oh, there's no ego, there's no suffering. And that's not true. That's hardly anybody experiences that. So this is one thing, but what did I just say? The purpose of our existence is that we start out with a point-like sense of self. We expand our sense of self, so to speak. We are working our way up into our Father's company until we have learned all aspects of creation and how it works, so that we have the foundation for creating our own creation that doesn't self-destruct in 5 minutes. And this is the whole purpose. And that's why I'm saying, if you think that a human being on Earth, on this planet, which is an unnatural planet where there's a lot of suffering, if you think a human being on this planet can attain an ultimate state of consciousness, you're trapped in duality. You're trapped in the ego because, as I said, you go into duality, you're creating a separate self, which we can also call the ego, although the ego is made up of many of these subconscious selves. But anyway, you're creating a separate self, and the separate self, it feels incomplete. And it's attempting to become incomplete through the dualistic illusions because that's all it can see. And therefore, it takes a dualistic illusion and it wants to elevate it to the status being absolute. But in duality, everything is relative because this is what the Buddha called the pairs. They are created at the same time. Good and evil. Well, good only has meaning in opposition to evil. So you can't talk about just good in a dualistic sense. There must always be an opposite. That means they are relative. None of them are absolute. But the ego takes one dualistic polarity and wants this to be the absolute. And it's the same with non-duality. That's why I'm saying some non-dual teachers, what they are portraying is a dualistic view of non-duality. Because they are trapped in this, all differentiation is duality. And that's why they think that it's possible here on Earth to attain the highest state of consciousness. And once you attain it, you have the ultimate realization. And then they will point to all of these people in the past, the Vedic rishis, the Buddha, Shankara, Jesus, Ramana Maharshi, Osho, and any number of contemporary teachers who either they believe it themselves or their followers believe they have attained this ultimate state of consciousness. Now, I'm not saying that there haven't been many people throughout history who have attained a much higher state of consciousness than the average person on Earth. I'm not saying there are many people who have moved out of duality, who have seen the illusions of the dualistic self, who have given up the separate self. I'm not saying that. But it's still not an ultimate state of consciousness. Because the Earth, and I explained this in depth in my video about how the world was created, the Earth is in an unascended sphere. It hasn't become permanent. And this means that our immediate task as individual beings on Earth is to raise our consciousness, overcome non-duality, raise our consciousness so we can ascend from Earth and we don't have to re-embody here. We have, so to speak, Earth can be seen as a school and we pass the final exam. We can move on. And then we ascend and we become ascended beings. And in the ascended realm, we can see so many aspects of creation that we can't see from Earth. Not only are we in an undescended sphere, but we're on an unnatural planet. To claim that on this planet a human being has attained the ultimate realization of how the universe works, it's just the ego trying to make itself ultimate. I'm sorry to say, it is ego. I don't care what people claim about it. There's just no other way to say it. It's just the ego trying to set itself up as having attained immortality and a godlike status. Don't eat the forbidden fruit, they were told in the Garden of Eden. The forbidden fruit is the duality consciousness. What did the serpent say? Thou shalt become as gods, knowing good and evil. Meaning, when you go into duality, you think you are God because you think you can define what is real and unreal. But as I said, everything you define in duality has an opposite polarity. When you go into seeing yourself as a connected being and expand your connection, you're not defining anything. You actually stop defining because you realize, as Jesus said, I can of my own self do nothing. And therefore, you discover what is real, how the world really actually was created. And when you keep increasing your sense of connection, you come to a point where you can even give up the sense that you are a being in this world, that you are an understanding being, and you can unite with your higher self. And that's the ultimate sense of self that we can attain in this world. But from there, we can, of course, grow until we attain the greater consciousness. And I can assure you that the greater consciousness is so far beyond anything that can be achieved on earth that it's just ridiculous to even think that you could achieve an ultimate state of consciousness here on earth. So anyway, I hope that this can help some people gain a deeper perspective on the whole non-duality phenomenon, because the reason why I talk about it so much is because I've been writing about the duality consciousness for over 20 years. And when I started studying this phenomenon of the non-dual teachers, I could see that they have some very deep and valid insights, but they are just colored by these illusions that they have, these logical flaws that they put themselves into, with only the undifferentiated is real and differentiation is duality. I mean, it just leads to so many misunderstandings. So I sense that there are many people who are attracted to the non-dual philosophy who are actually very close to really grasping the essence of what spiritual growth is and what it really means to attain a higher state of consciousness. It's just that most of these non-dual teachers, it's like they can't, it's like they had created a catch-22, and the saying about a catch-22 is, you can't get there from here. So they're talking about attaining a higher state of consciousness, but there's no path that leads from here to there. So people are stuck in the middle, and I think that's a pity when spiritually mature people are stuck in a blind alley. And so that's really my only motivation for talking about this whole phenomenon. I mean, in a sense, you could say, yeah, what does it matter to me if people don't want to listen? They don't want to listen, and that's, of course, you can say that. But then you can, then you can always say, why even talk? Why even give any kind of teachings? I mean, even the non-dual teachers, they have some kind of purpose for teaching. So for me, it's simply I want to share my insights in the hope that it can inspire other people, and if it does, that's good.